So do stop me if you want and ask any questions or share your own experiences. I started to become interested in the topic of fraud way back in the late 70s. So shortly after I joined a company called Polysar, a petrochemical company in Canada. I was in charge of the internal audit function. And I was in a bar one evening, and this guy approached me. And when he learned what I did, he started to complain about his inability to get any contracts with this company. We were building a large billion-dollar new petrochemical plant. And our policy was to give contracts only to local people. What really happened is a group of local investors got together, formed 4 or 5 companies, and they decided who would bid for the job, who would be the lowest bidder. So in fact, we were paying 1.5 times the value of the job, but we're getting 4 or 5 bids, and they rotated the lowest bidder every time. The guys became millionaires from this. The RCMP eventually became involved, and it was the first time I had to give evidence in court. And I had to point to one of our senior vice presidents who was wrapped up in the scheme. And they said, "Do you see the defendant in this room?" And this lowly internal audit manager was pointing to one of our executives. It was rather embarrassing. I've lived and worked in Guyana and Barbados, in the UK, in Switzerland, in Canada, in the USA. And in every one of those corporations that I work in, I found the picture to be much the same. In public corporations, there's almost an acceptance that once it is company funds being used and abused, it is okay. A sort of feeling of entitlement. I do some guest lecturing in Florida A&M University to students about to graduate and going into the world. And I have a question I asked them about their expectations. And they clearly believe that these are perks of the job. Last point I want to make before getting into the seminar is that this is a problem that is throughout corporations. I was renting my house a few years ago to an executive from a large UK company. And the rent was $2,800 a month, plus he had to pay his own utilities. And he had the nerve to ask me to make the rent $3,500, okay, and let the company pay the full amount so that he wouldn't have to pay the utility bill. I mean, this is a top executive. So if that's going on at the top of a company, what do you think is happening throughout the company? Now, what percentage of revenues do you think might be lost to fraud and abuse in a company in a year? Anybody wants to hazard a guess? Omar, you want to guess?
Feel free to shout out.
Yeah, what percentage of revenue do you think is lost due to fraud and abuse in a year from a company? Okay, well, I'll give the answer, 5% of revenue. Now, that kind of means that if you have $5 million in sales, you're losing $250,000 a year due to fraud and abuse. This is an average number. This is statistics developed by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners in 2012. Now, what does it take to improve your bottom line by 5%? Many companies would love to have a 5% improvement in the bottom line, yet they are not proactive in going after fraud and abuse. For example, hiring the services of my corporation could save you probably half that for a much less sum, and that's an annual recurring expense. What's the definition of what we call occupational fraud? It's the use of someone's position to enrich themselves personally, not through the salary that they are entitled to, but through the deliberate misuse or misappropriation of the employing organization's resources or assets. So that number 5% relates to this definition. Okay? What is fraud? Fraud is more like a virus, okay, that will continue to drain and increase the resources of a corporation until at some point it clears up. Okay? If it's unchecked, it will just keep increasing. Now, all companies without exception are victims of fraud in some manner or fashion. And here's a very surprising statistics. Small companies, that is, with less than 100 employees, are 100 times more likely than larger corporations to experience fraud from within. That's a statistics. Now, it's surprising. One would think the larger companies would have more experience in fraud. But one of the reasons is this. The controls in a small company are sometimes non-existent or poor or difficult to put in place because of the limited number of employees. So people have more responsibility, more areas they can work with, and that opens the area for poorer control. Here's another I would say, surprising statistic. The average loss from fraud in a small company is 20% larger than the average loss in a large corporation. Now, one would say that's surprising. After hearing of anyone in these massive multi-million-dollar frauds, how could the average loss in a small corporation be larger than that in a large? And this is one basic reason. We'll touch on some others later. Because of the lack of control in a small corporation, the fraud goes on and on and on undetected year after year after year. So the loss adds up much more. While in a larger corporation where there are better controls, it might be caught after 6 months, 8 months, 6 weeks, who knows, but certainly wouldn't go on for years and years and years undetected. And that's where that increase in loss in a small corporation is larger than the increase in loss in a large corporation. Now, so this is a report done in 2012 by the same certified fraud examiners. That 4 out of 5 businesses have suffered fraud in the past 3 years. 1 in 10 large companies lose over 100 million a year. And large companies over 100 employees is the definition. Lose over 100 million a year. 100 million, 1 in 10, 10%, okay, per year. And back to the point I made, the money that could be spent on due diligence and preventative measures using a consultant in internal control to review and improve your control is far cheaper than waiting until the loss shows itself, the potential loss from doing nothing. Also from this report, it said that asset misappropriation is the most common fraud and the longest duration. That is payroll schemes, billing schemes, theft of cash, expense reporting, inventory. Now, in every fraud, one tries to convert whatever they're stealing generally to cash. So it has to be something that has a cash value, okay? Even intellectual property has a cash value. Corruption is the next largest category. That is where you have conflict of interest, kickbacks, and other bribery schemes. Is the next largest category. Now, here is some questions that I'd like to answer. Are these perpetrators older or younger people? Are they career criminals? Are they employees, customers, suppliers? We just said that 3 out of 5 corporations have suffered loss in the last 5 years. Are these management people, low-level employees? Are they new, long-term employees? Anyone wants to make a suggestion in any one of those areas? Do you think they're younger people or older people, employees or non-employees, that are perpetrating this fraud in general?
If you don't have a microphone, please type in the chat box.
Anybody
I'll
want?
guess younger. Oh, we have
I see Rainier
from Malta and from Iceland.
I see Rainier on the line. I see Omari's on the line. You know, somebody. You know, I don't want to be the only person speaking. I want to hear some other voices. So, do you think these perpetrators are older or younger people, or management or low-level employees? I guess I have to give you the answer. Okay, we have shy people. Okay, 15% are under the age of 30. 15%. That means most of them are older people, not young employees. 70% are between the age of 30 and 55. 80% are first-time offenders. They're not career criminals. 80% of them at least the first time they've been caught. 85%, most are employees, not third parties, not your customers, not your suppliers, but your own employees, the people around you. 85% are employees, of which 85% are management, senior employees, not junior, low-level employees. And most of them are longer-term employees. Only 13 have worked less than 2 years, but 22% have worked over 10 years. So we're talking about a trusted, long-term, older employee in a management position that is more likely to commit a fraud than a younger, low-level, new employee. That's frightening. If you think about it, that is frightening. The people you're trusting with the key to the safe are the people most likely to violate that trust.
If you look at the chat, Gordon, one of our colleagues in Monaco meets all those requirements. You can see to the chat box. That's all.
You're all for those requirements. Maybe that's why you're being so quiet, huh? Okay. How are frauds uncovered or discovered? Most of them are through tips, accidental. 43% are by tips. Once again, most corporations are not proactive in their approach to fraud prevention and fraud detection. They are reactive. So they wait until 6 years down the line, they've lost $100 billion. Somebody calls and says, this guy's living beyond his means, and, you do an investigation and you discover it. 7% was just by accident. Okay. And only 28% are done through reviews, proactively looking for it through internal audit or management reviews. 28% are discovered. So most by tips, very few by accident, and a mere 28% through proactive approaches, which is not necessarily the best approach to adopt. Now, so we identify the profile of the fraudster, what he or she tends to look like, one of us. Now, they have interviewed a number of these people who have been convicted and from fraud, and there are certain factors that have been present in every single fraud. The first factor is a need for money. Now, I do not know one of us here that don't have a need for money. When you're earning $1 million or 100,000, we always tend to find ourselves in a position where we need or want more. So that's 100% of us. Strike one. As I said, 3 factors present. The first factor is need, and I'm saying every one of us has a need. Now, you can note those people who are high spenders, living beyond their means. Some people's needs might be exacerbated by a gambling or drug habit or a spouse that spends too much. But basically, we all have a need. The next factor that is present in every fraud is the opportunity. You can't commit a fraud unless you have the opportunity to commit it. Okay? So if you make it easy, then you're inviting a fraud. We have a need. You make the opportunity easy. And of course, the best defense is not to make it easy. Have strong system of controls and do some preventative measures like fraud and ethics program, like internal audit reviews, like a hotline. Now, so let's take this example, the practical situation. You're an employee. You have a need for some pens and papers and erasers. Your kids are in school, and there's a need for pen, paper, eraser. So you have a need. There's a cabinet with all this stationery, and it's unlocked and open. You go in the cabinet, you take out 3 pads of paper, a couple of pens, a couple of erasers, you put in your briefcase, you take it home, probably saying, you're going to use it for work. But you damn well know that you're going to give that to your kids, okay? Or the large portion of it is going to go to your kids. So you have a need for some paper. You have an opportunity, the cabinet is open, it's not locked, you have to go somewhere for a key, and you go take the paper, take it home. Now, that's theft. That is theft. You're not entitled to that because you work in the company. People think of it as entitlement. It's clear theft. Now, The third factor, why? The third factor, why? You rationalize it. You say it's only a pad of paper. You say it's going to be used for, you're going to say everybody does it. You're going to say it's an entitlement. It's a privilege. You rationalize it. So the tone at the top of an organization is very important because the need will exist in everyone. The opportunities will exist. The higher the level you are, the more management position you're in, the greater the opportunity. Now, you know, if you set an example at the top that implies that some of these things are okay, then it's going to happen throughout the organization. Now, you can rationalize it because you say, I don't get paid enough, I work hard, other people don't do it. So those disgruntled employees, you know, particularly those in position of trust, are some of the people to watch. Then a lot of corporations make a mistake of they find a fraud situation, whether it's expense reporting or otherwise, they fire the employee, they don't prosecute them. So people look on and say, well, even if I get caught, I get away with the 100 million or the 100,000 or whatever it is, I just get fired. I got some money, I get another job. They don't even publicize it. I don't get charged. So it's very important to prosecute those people that have been found, you know, with their hands in the tails. Also, note unusual behaviors. And I may touch on this later. This may sound usual, but employees coming in early, always staying late, never taking vacation, doing the job at home, even when they're sick, may not just be the sign of a dedicated employee. It may be more than that. I remember when I first moved to Switzerland, I was in charge in treasury operations. And there was this employee who was always in early, always in late, worked weekends, and even vacations, he still popped in to do a couple of transactions, etc. And there's some rationalization for this. He covered 3 zones, Asia Pacific, he was living in Switzerland, Asia Pacific, there's a Canadian company in Canada. So, you know, early for Asia Pacific, late for Canada, that's not unusual. But, you know, not taking vacations in a Swiss environment was not too usual. So I immediately said every employee must take the vacation every year, and they must take at least 1 or 2 continual weeks, not just a day here, a day here. They must be out of the job with somebody else who will be in the job to see what they are doing. It took about 18 months for him to go off on vacation. We discovered a scheme he was working. We were moving, at those times interest rates were like 18%. And we were moving funds from APAC, Asia Pacific region to Canada. So funds may leave Asia Pacific on a Friday, arrive in Canada on a Monday or Tuesday, and during that time he parked the fund somewhere else, and he got overnight interest on these funds, which at that time is rather significant when you're moving tens of millions of dollars. But it took forcing him to take vacation and not allowing him to come in and cover up his transactions that we're able to discover that scheme. So as I said, there's opportunity, and you know, we all have opportunities of different nature. There's a need which could be increased by habits or even pressures from within to deliver. And then there's a rationalization, the attitude that comes together. So that third factor, rationalization and attitude, is where ethics come in. The need will be there, the opportunity will be there. The only thing will prevent that individual, you, I, or others, from taking that third step is the ethical values that we instill, that we have, that we see, that is throughout the corporation. And hence, that's very important. What is ethics? The choices that people make sway decisions. Okay, what are the factors they consider? The choices that we consider when putting things in the context of right or wrong. You know, an example I use, and it's not, I don't always like to use it, but in Italy, paying tax or evading tax is considered the norm. It's not acceptable, but it happens all around. It's all acceptable. So people do not see trying to evade tax or trying to defraud the revenue as ethically incorrect. In that environment, it will persist and increase. So the choices that people weigh to consider what's right or wrong should take into consideration stakeholders, who the stakeholders are, not just themselves, and it should be based on some truth, honesty, and fairness. And it is the behavior within a corporation that is displayed at the top and expected. So if the top management are going to go on business trips and take their spouses and go to the World Cup in Brazil and spend tens of thousands of dollars of company money and justify it, that's right. If that's the picture you're painting, I can assure you that that picture will perpetuate throughout the corporation. And people think it's okay. Let me just go back to that previous slide. One question here. We're talking about ethics and the picture the corporation paints. You're selling a product. You can sell the product by talking about your benefits, how good your product is, or you can sell the product by disparaging your competitor's product, whether it's true or false. You can just say, theirs not as fast as yours, or theirs not as good as yours, when in fact it might be wrong. If you have a picture within a corporation where it's acceptable to disparage a competitor's product, even if it's not true, where it's not true, then again, the environment in that corporation is one that will open itself to fraud and abuse throughout. Who are those stakeholders that you should consider in making your decisions, your ethical decisions, ethical choices? The shareholders, donors or investors, obviously, your customers, your employees, your suppliers, your competitors, the community, government. There are many people who could be impacted by a simple decision. Okay, a simple decision. If you're going to take the waste product and just dump it in the backyard, thinking about your bottom line and the cost of it, the cost to dispose it properly, yes, you might be thinking about the shareholders in the short term, but you're not thinking about the community or society as a whole. So everyone should be taking into consideration all these stakeholders in trying to make or come to a decision, or to put a decision in the proper context. So here's a case study that I use in college, so college students that are graduating. You're a new contractor on the job. So there is a new contractor on the job, a $5 million contract, and you are the project manager. And the contractor approaches you and says, look, we'll be working over the next few years closely together. I'm glad I won the bid. And you had nothing to do with his getting the bid. And we should get to know each other better. I have tickets for a World Cup game. We can travel there to Brazil with accommodation paid. You can bring your significant other. Will you accept that invitation? And I can assure you, within the college environment, the majority of those students says, sure, I will. That's what it's all about. That's what they expect. Okay? And in the business environment, many people will accept that invitation. Now, to me, this is not a gray area. This is a no. If you really believe that this trip will benefit your corporation, then in my opinion, what you should do, go on the trip, pay for it yourself, and expense it. If it's for the benefit of the corporation, then expense it. If your boss will agree, then I guess it is for the benefit of the corporation. But I'm sure most people will not agree that this is a benefit to the corporation. Okay? And it's more personal benefit. And that's where I see the line is drawn. The other considerations, would it stand up to public scrutiny? If it were in the headlines of the newspapers the next day that you went on this trip, would it be okay? Would you feel good about it or bad about it? Have you considered the interests of all the shareholders? Are you harming others? Does it make sense? Okay? So based on some of those some of those issues in my experience and some cases I've come across, I put together what I call 10 ethical, practical guidelines in business. And this is the guidelines that should guide you in dealing with people and making decisions. First, don't base your decision on what other people are doing. Everyone does it. It's not an excuse. Okay? Base it on your own ethics and standards. Secondly, you're in a trusted position. You have been trusted. Will your actions increase trust or will it question your trust? If it will increase the trust, then yes, go ahead and do it. If it will put in question the trust that has been put in your hands, then clearly the answer should be no. Don't do it. Beware of emails. Once you hit that send button, assume they are public knowledge. Beware of telephone conversations. Similarly, they may be taped. Even though it's illegal in many countries to tape it, they may still be taped. Assume that someone is out to get you. Assume that someone is looking at everything you're doing and they're trying to get you. So, err on the side of being squeaky clean rather than take chances. These are not necessarily in an order. They're just top 10. 6. If you have a choice to disclose or not to disclose. For example, suppose some bids are being received in a project and you're responsible for it. And one of the bidders, it turned out to be an old schoolmate from 20 years ago. You haven't been in touch with for a number of years. It just happens to be an old schoolmate. You're not close friends. Should you disclose this fact or not disclose this fact? Now, as I said, err on the side of disclosing the fact. Even though it will not influence or you don't think it will influence your decision, disclose it. Because if it comes to light later on, it wouldn't look good. If you will in any way personally benefit from whatever it is, lean towards no. Be skeptical. If your involvement in a social activity, I mentioned that before, would be good for business, pay for it yourself. No problem. Expensive. Okay, and that will help you to weed out the ones that are really not of true, or majority of it is personal and not business. Around the golf, yes, business is discussing golf, etc. But a trip to the World Cup, I say no, clearly no. Again, I've repeated before, assume your decisions will make the headlines next week. And if those headlines will make your ma proud of you, then yes, do it. If it will make your ma ashamed of you, then don't do it. So, how do we build high integrity organizations? If we are key people, top management in an organization, what can we do to ensure that our organization is one of those where integrity is high? The tone at the top I mentioned is important. As they say, don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. If you expect people to be squeaky clean, then you be squeaky clean. Don't have anything questioned. Every corporation should have a code of business conduct. People should know what's expected of them. Can they hire an employee? Can they give a contract to somebody they know, even though it's a casual? Make it clear what is expected of them. So you need a code of business conduct. And in that code, you should clarify issues like conflict of interest. So employees know what's expected of them. Whether in some corporations, family members can work in the corporation once they not go to the same department or on. In others, it might be acceptable. Make it clear. And then have an annual declaration by key employees that they have personally complied with your code of ethics, which you should have, and that all the direct reports should also sign off saying, I've read it, I've understood it, I've complied with it. It seems small, but if you keep it in their face and have them to sign for it, they're less likely to violate it. Now, the majority board members, if such, should be independent. I was giving a seminar in Barbados years ago, and was being interviewed by the press during the break. And they asked me what do I think are some of the challenges that face Barbados as a corporation. Not knowing that much, but knowing it's a small country with very few key people, I said that's first point, the independence of board members. Too many cross board members in one company, the same board members in a different company or competitor, etc. Unbeknownst to me, it really was an issue that came up very recently in the country regarding the supermarket. The supermarket chains are more or less owned by the same people. And any of you who've gone to Barbados, you know the prices in supermarkets in Barbados are ridiculously high. Okay? And there really is no competition. There's several chains, but they have some same board members and some cross ownerships. Having a hotline or having an ombudsman or some mechanism for employees that have complaints or suspicions come forward with it. Remember, 43% of frauds were discovered by tips. So make it easy for that tip to come into somebody in authority. Again, on the one hand, prosecute employees who commit fraud. Prosecute them. And on the other hand, recognize and reward high ethical behaviors. Our corporate governance, all within the same framework. After the Enron scandal and issues over where was management and where the auditors, etc., there was some legislation called Sarbanes that came into board. And it started around the world at increased focus on corporate governance and the things that need to be done. Issues of audit committees, independent boards. The auditors, members can't say, I don't know, I relied on this person. If you're an audit committee member, you're presumed to be an expert. Okay? And they must have experience in finance, etc. So this whole corporate governance became a key area. And what is corporate governance? It's a framework by which the board and senior management of organizations are held accountable for the organizations that they are responsible for. They are responsible for and they are held accountable. It is the process, the customs, the practices, the laws, and the regulatory institutions that affect the way in which a corporation is directed, administered, or controlled. So we are totally in the management area of a corporation. The accountability and fiduciary duty of the board of directors and officers towards its stakeholders. And we define stakeholders again, not just shareholders, donors, investors, but employees, customers, suppliers, communities, government, society as a whole. So that's the corporate governance framework. And this Sarbanes-Oxley Act addressed many of the aspects of this framework. It said it raised the bar. It set up a public accounting oversight board that had oversight over the operations of the corporate governance part of public corporations. It increased the accountability of the management by increasing accountability, fines, jail terms, qualifications were all touched. It asked for more transparency, auditor independence. The auditor cannot be the same auditor every year, in out. It has to go to bid. It has to change auditors. It has to be independent. They had a close look at the auditing firms. It enhanced the penalties for fraud and particularly management type fraud. It required the establishment of an audit committee whose members cannot say, I really didn't understand, I didn't know what's going on, I relied. No, they are required to be financial experts. And you know what? They can go to jail if they don't do the job. So a lot of corporations are having a hard time getting board members to be audit committee members because the bar is raised. You know, you can't just collect your board, your salary or whatever it is, and attend meetings and don't pay attention. It also said that the CEO and the CFO must sign off on the financial statements. And not only must they sign off the financial statement, they also must say that there's been no fraud or we have adequate internal controls. So they must issue an annual statement saying that the internal controls over financial reporting are in place and are effective, which means they have to understand the controls, document the controls, evaluate the controls, and test the controls. That's an ongoing year-to-year responsibility. It actually was a big business back in 2007 and 8, the first years that this came into place. Big business for accounting firms who made a meal and made a fortune from putting these controls in place. They must also evaluate the work performed by management. They must do independent tests, I said, of the control, independent of the auditors, and they must issue a report on the financial statements. That's what the external auditors have to do, and that's what the management has to do as well. So both sides are held responsible. Now, let's go back to the Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a requirement. Any corporation operating anywhere in the world is U.S. registered has to comply with this, any other branches. Now, these controls have to be in place, have to be identified, have to be documented, have to be tested. Now, how you define a control affects how much testing you have to do and whether to pass or fail. Here's a good example. I took over this for a $6 billion U.S. company, this Sarbanes-Oxley documentation, and the first year I saved them $5.5 million in the cost of testing and insurance. This is it. $5.5 million savings, documented savings. Because how you define a control is very important. Let's take, you guys are all involved in the credit business, so credit management is very important. So you have a customer who's placing an order, and it goes above the credit balance. You set a credit limit, and the order is placed, it goes above the credit balance. And you have a process in place that says if it's above by so much, it could be approved by this level person or second level person. And everyone has to be approved before it's issued. That's your practice. That's your policy. So if you define that control saying every shipment that puts a customer above its credit limit must have prior written approval by one of these people, I guarantee that control will actually fail. Because you're going to test 45 transactions. And if more than 5 of them fail, the controls fail. Now, because it's a 45 or more transactions, minimum 45. Now, somebody's on vacation, somebody's traveling, somebody's not in the office, an order comes in, we call him, he may approve it, but it will not be in writing, it will not be documented, he wouldn't have it. He forgot to send the email. It does fail. If you define that control in a different way, say every month, every shipment that goes above the credit limit will be reviewed by the sales manager and approved. Now you have a monthly control, so you only have to test 3 months. And all the control says is that he's reviewed this list and he signed it. So he will look at the list of all shipments over and he signed the list. Now, many of them you will have known about it before. Many of them might be properly documented under your policies of prior approval. But in fact, the Sarbanes-Oxley control as defined says it's monthly. You look at 3 months. It's quite easy for him to sign that form. It's going to pass. So, but there are lots of tricks for setting up the control environment that will reduce your testing costs, will reduce your likelihood of failure. So how have companies done this Sarbanes-Oxley? They've documented the controls, they adopted bottom or top-down approach, and they There are 3 types of controls. And I'm talking a bit more on controls because it's a framework that should be put in place in every corporation. It's a framework that will prevent fraud. It's a framework that I consider myself an expert in putting in place. There are 3 types of controls: preventative or detective controls. Preventive controls is one before, and detective is one after. A preventive control says, before this happens, this has to be done. A detective control runs a report afterwards and says, let's see if it happened, and let's investigate where it happened. The manual controls, automated controls. An automated control, if it's a computer system control, you put it in place, you test it, and you know it will apply 100% of the time. Every time you try to, 3 months, your password will be deleted, and you have to put in a new password. It's automated, you can't bypass it. But the manual control can be bypassed. So an automated control is obviously more effective than a manual control. A detective control is less work than a preventive control. If you say all checks must be signed by 3 people, it's a whole lot of work. It takes a lot of time. If instead you say any check over 10,000 will be reviewed, it's less work. Okay, so the cost of the control varies between the mix of preventive, detective, manual, automated, and the frequency of the control. This is a weekly, daily, monthly control. So I think I touched before on the importance of defining the control for Sarbanes Oxley purposes. The way you define it will determine the way it's tested, will determine whether it's passed or failed. It's not that the other controls should not be in place, but for Sarbanes Oxley, you have to be careful what you define as a control. Otherwise, you may be setting yourself up for quite a bit of work. So internal control is the most important element in preventing and detecting fraud. It prevents the acts of fraud. It acts as a deterrent of fraud. Where there's a poor control environment or breakdown in controls, there will be fraud. Where someone has the ability to override controls, there will be fraud. But a good system ensures early detection of fraud. It wouldn't go on for 5-6 years undetected, maybe 5-6 days, 5-6 months, because you have a good internal control structure. And a normal audit, external or internal audit function, is not designed to detect fraud. It's not designed. The external auditors state clearly that the procedures are not there to detect fraud. Don't hold them responsible for not detecting fraud. Their procedures are there to give an opinion on the financial statement. So corporations should seriously consider. Corporations, I say corporations, but organizations should clearly consider a periodic internal control review by internal control of fraud specialists like CFE associates. Okay, that will prevent, detect, and help you to put in place a good internal control. And not only every few years, because controls break down. People change it. It may be in place today, 2 years from now, it has been changed. It has to be specific to business. Okay? It has to be designed depending on the size of business, the type of business, the industry you're in, the control framework will differ. It is designed to both prevent and detect fraud. SOD means segregation of duties. It's perhaps the most important component to prevent fraud. By segregation duties, who can do what? If one person can initiate a transaction and record the transaction, there is no adequate segregation duty, because he can hide or he can record something different from what he initiated. But if the initiation and the recording is separated, and that's a key control, then segregation duties is much better. So you need to review all activities in a corporation, thinking of it from segregation of duties perspective. I touched about vacation, mandatory vacations. We want them out of that office so you can see what's going on. Reconciliations. I can't say that often enough. It's often treated lightly. It's a very, very key control, particularly in a financial or business or banking environment. It is very good. It's not a light reconciliation, whether it's a bank reconciliation or otherwise. And again, the suspense account, it relates to reconciliations. Things sitting in suspense accounts, that's problematic. That's really high things. They should be closely investigated. Other factors that contribute to fraudulent activity are weak internal controls and repeating reconciliation not done, poor accounting practices, unqualified and trained persons performing duties, lack of proper policies and procedures. Pressures and employee pressure. A large fraud I investigated in Jamaica 4 years ago, around 2009, just after the breakdown of the financial system in the States, was due to pressure on a banking employee to produce results. Pressure. Even in bad times, he was under pressure to match the previous year's performance, which really truly is impossible in the environment, or very, very difficult. Overriding or bypassing controls. Poor segregation of duties, repetition. Disregarding recommendations made by auditors. The auditors come in, they look at the controls, they issue the financial statements and say, here's some things you should look at, and that gets shown in the filing cabinet and never looked at again. That's bad. And no fraud prevention program. Red flags to note, this might be a summary of things that came up before. People living beyond their means. People have an unusual intimate knowledge of the system that they could use to their advantage. Breakdown the procedures, unexplained why this wasn't done, this reconciliation wasn't done, or this wasn't signed. People in a position of trust. But this is one I added very recently based on that last investigation I did in Jamaica. This guy was top performer. What he did, he hired people in the positions maybe a little bit above their means, so they would be above their capabilities. So they were a bit dependent on him and fearful of using his job. And he kept them in silos, and they were afraid of him, and they did whatever he said. They never questioned him. Regular overrides, he also overrided the system regularly and was never questioned. Override or bypass the system. And ability to deflect your attention from activities, deflect it elsewhere. And I must admit, many of these things that I put in after that investigation. A consistent top performer, even in very difficult times, this guy was producing results. It was fabricated. It was hidden. Transaction losses were hidden. But at incredible times, he was slated to take over this banking operation. He was number 2 because he was such a high performer, consistently high performer, with pressure to produce. There, as I said, pressure employees to deliver, overriding controls, this is management role, abusive, poor management, encouraging unethical behavior, poorly designed controls, and I'm being a bit repetitive here. IT controls, I think I'm coming to the end of my presentation. IT controls, IT people tend to focus sometimes on speed, not so much on speed and maybe unauthorized access. But within the whole IT environment, and I'm not an IT control specialist, I have someone that I work with when I get into the area, but IT controls are as important or are an integral part of the internal control structure in a corporation. So, what are the things that the likelihood of a fraud occurring? Okay, could be high, medium, or low, depending on the assessment. But if a fraud can affect the brand name or revenue reputation or investment confidence in a business, it is catastrophic. Okay, if it's just somebody running off with some money, it's manageable, no serious effect on brand revenue or reputation, yes. But within that areas of the reputation of a business, it can be catastrophic, even a small fraud. So for some things up here, I started off by pointing out the prevalence of fraud within corporations, smaller corporations being more likely than larger corporations, and the loss in smaller being greater, 20% larger than the loss in larger. I pointed out that it is cheaper to be proactive and spend some money on preventative measures than just be reactive and wait until it comes to light and realize how much you lost, then you call in somebody to help you. The typical fraudster seems like the most unlikely person. It's always someone very likable, and they feel guilty sometimes. They bring in coffee and donuts and microwave. This is actual fraud I discovered in the university. It's one who bought the microwave and brought in the microwave, and every day she's the most likable person. Most unlikely person. Often a well-liked, dedicated employee. First time offender, we said, he or she, however, rationalized his or her act. I paid back shortly. It's just a small amount. It's not important. Everybody does it. Whatever the rationalization. Most of them are employees. Most of them are management, 85%. And we spoke about the need. Every one of us has a need. The opportunity. Every one of us has opportunities to varying degrees. And the only thing that separates us from taking that extra step is the rationalization of the act, which is embodied in the ethical standards that we live to, or the ethical environment in the corporation. Okay, we didn't do any case studies. I did mention 10 do's and don'ts, and we touched on corporate governance and increased accountability and the need for more transparency. And we have 4 minutes in case anyone has any questions that they would like to ask. Otherwise, we can close off a few minutes early. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got one, Gordon. Thank you. Very, very good talk. I'd like to know your views as an international company. Obviously, going back to the ethics, if we look at the Italian example, what may be okay in one country is not necessarily acceptable in another country. So have you got any thoughts on building a corporate ethics when perhaps the ethics change across the different countries that we're actually working with?
I would say, in general, there's not much difference, except in certain countries where kickbacks and bribes are the expected norm and prevalence. Some Eastern European countries, some Arabian countries, where it is the norm and expectation. Okay, that's where there's environment. Now, it's illegal for any U.S. company doing business, irrespective of where they are, to pay any bribe or kickback. But we know what happens because they're in these countries and they're doing business. Okay, and I've been in corporations where I know it's happening, and I've seen it happen. The way in which it's avoided this kickback issue is appointing an agent. And an agent in country A might be paid 10%. The agent in country B might be paid 25%. That's the norm, whatever the norm is. Okay? And you don't want to know any other question. So in those countries, they appoint an agent who is paid a pretty high commission, and he can do what he wants with his 35% of every business deal. And you try to insulate yourself. You don't want to know, as a U.S. corporation, what's happening there. But to be in these countries, you cannot do business unless you're willing to violate the U.S. laws. So I would say generally from a corporate ethical perspective, except in those countries where to do business, kickbacks have to be paid. I see no difference be it in European countries or U.S. South American companies. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I think Emma, the presentation will be there for other people to view, or to send on to someone else.
That's That's correct, Gordon. I'll load it up into the meeting space, so all those who've had invites will be able to view it, and it will also be on the website. So, if anybody does have any...
Yeah, I'll actually, well, when folks follow thing, I'll actually go to comments and the opposite manner and say that ethics are universal.
I will hear you not very well.
Okay. That point was important. But I would like to thank you, Gordon.
Okay, I will.
I really appreciate it.
Okay.
That's all.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And, you know, you can circulate it to the other people who are not able to attend.
Thank you very much for your time, Gordon.
Actually, can I sneak in one more question?
No problem, boy. Yeah.
Obviously, we're a company that deals with a lot of data, a lot of business information, business data. Have you ever seen any examples where data has been used to identify some of the internal frauds?
Absolutely, yes. I do a one-day seminar, and half of the day is dedicated to fraud detection techniques. There's a technique that I particularly like called Benford's Law. It's based on a digital analysis. You give me all your accounts payable amounts, invoice amounts, and there's an expected pattern. It would take me a little while to get you to understand this if you would stay on. But there's an expected pattern and of the numbers, okay? And if we fall outside of this pattern, it's suspicious. I've used that successfully to detect fraud. Let me give one quick example. This is a banking environment, loans granted and loans written off. And I used this analysis, and I saw that loans of between 3,000 and 5,000 in a particular loan write-off, in a particular branch were higher than average. Than expected, no, not average. This is expected. This is universal expectation, this digital analysis. So I started to look at loans written off, $4,000, between $4,000 and $5,000. I discovered a scheme where this guy was granting loans, 6,000 or 6,000 or thereabouts. He had authorization to write off loans under 5,000. So the person would pay off a little bit of the loan, and stop paying, he wrote off the loans. So there were an unusual number of loans written off with $3,000 and $4,000 and above. Okay, and that was detected 100% through this digital analysis. It's rather, I can't explain it in a few minutes. I've got 10 slides, 15 slides that I used to, and examples that I used to explain it. But yes, in the olden days, you could only have time to look at a few transactions. I could download on my computer every single transaction for X years from a corporation, and what better way to start an investigation by looking at the total population rather than sampling. So digital analysis, key way.
That's good. I've understand the concept. So thank you very much.
Okay, we're over. Okay. On time. Thanks very much.
Thanks again, Scotland.
Bye.